Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 107. Afreilach and Chayde to everyone, Eid Ad Sheni, in Hashanah Muberes, a pregnant, a full year, as well as Shnas Hakel, a year of Achdus and gathering and unity. And as the Gemara says, Mismach Geula Geula, the reason we celebrate Purim in Ad Sheni is because to make it go consecutively right into the next Chodesh Nisan, Mismach Geula Legeula, one redemption to the next. All of Chassidus, as Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov, Yefutzim Einesecha Chutza, that's when Mashiach will come, is about bringing Geula, which in simple psychological terms, in Chassidus Applied terms, it means redemption, both personal and global. Redemption from what? From all the things that shackle us, that bind us, that trap us, that inhibit us, that limit us. The mere fact that Elokus is not begili, that the divine, the purpose of existence and existence are not aligned with one another. In other words, the machine called life, individually and collectively, is not fully aligned with its creator and its purpose and plan. That alone is a form of golus, a displacement. And Geula is when everything is realigned again. So this is a perfect month to prepare for that, as this month leads into the month of Nisan. You can present and any question you like. Let me just give the address. I always do it later in the class. I might as well do it right now. At meaningfullife.com/MyLife. There's a forum there where you can anonymously submit any question, any comment, as well as the ability today also to download these programs afterwards in iTunes. You can find that all at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. Let's go right into the timely topic, which is that this coming Shabbos is Parsha Zachor. It's also Parsha Vayikra. However, but because Zachor is unique, let's talk about Parsha Zachor from the perspective of Chassidus and the context of Chassidus Applied. Now, Zachor, of course, means to remember. But this is talk Zachor asher asa lecha Amalek, to remember that which Amalek did to you. This alone is a whole psychological study of its own, what Amalek is. As we know, Chassidus, it talks about Amalek as gematria, the same numerical equivalent as the word suffix, doubt. Doubt is, of course, one of the issues that plagues many of us, or I would say plagues all of us at different times, where we're in doubt, we're confused in how to move, how to make a move, what to decide upon when we have different issues that present themselves. And Zachor and Amalek also represents Chassidus Kerirus, asher karcha baderech. So even though the literal interpretation, asher karcha baderech, the one who met you in the way, because as we know when the Jews were leaving Egypt, Mitzrayim, Amalek attacked them right there when they were weak and vulnerable, which was only possible by a cruel nation like Amalek, and part of that is asher karcha. So this explains, karcha also means from the word kerach, from kar, kridus, kalkite, indifference, apathy, which in some ways is connected to the concept of doubt. When we're in doubt, it paralyzes us, it freezes us. And a karcha also, so this talks about, karcha could also be the idea that everything it just happened, nikra nikris. Karcha, you were suddenly attacked as if it's like an accident. The idea of accidents, not as hashgacha pratis, which is yet another dimension of the clip of Amalek. And so this talks about Hareshis Goyim Amalek. Amalek is considered the arch, the crown, the head and the crown of all klippa, of all negative energy, for the reasons that we just described, because there's nothing positive about it. And that's why it has to be eradicated completely. Zachor al tishkach, to remember and never to forget. And that is the essence of eradicating the forces that paralyze us and do not let us express ourselves, that inhibit, that in some ways do not block and impede our way of expressing our souls, expressing our interests, expressing what is the best thing for us. So Amalek has many lessons in that regard. But I'll talk about one point with Zachor. And specifically, I remember one week the Rebbe once wrote in a Sikha, I think it was in Tafshin Nun Halaf or Tafshin Nun. I don't have the source right in front of me. I just remember when the Rebbe edited it. So he was saying that Motzei Shabbos, people should go into the Maskidus. Maskidus is a name for secretariat, the Rebbe's secretariat, to get a bottle of mashke, for different activities. And when the Rebbe edited the Sikha, he added by the word maskiris, he wrote, Gam Eloshen Zikorin, Re'ei Drushei Zocher, Pasha Zachor become Mekemis. Meaning maskiris, which means technically secretariat, but it also means maskiris, maskir, that they remind, a maskir reminds the one that they're a secretary to of whatever needs to be reminded. That's part of their job. And the Rebbe cited the Drushim of Parsha Zachor. It always struck me, and I've never really discussed it, and I thought it's an opportune time to do so. The Rebbe connecting seemingly a simple thing, going to the secretariat, going to the Rebbe's secretary, and picking something up with basically the Rebbe's secretary, and connecting it to Zachor. Because as Chassidus explains, Zikorin and Shikha, Zikorin means to remember, and Shikha means to forget. Memory and forgetfulness are symbolize health and lack of health. Ein shikha tachas kisei kvedecha, Chazal tell us. There's no forgetfulness beneath the kisei kvedecha, the divine throne. Why? Because when things are healthy, why should something be forgotten? Forgetfulness is a result of some type of diminishing, some type of loss of memory, some type of distance from the experience that you've had. And that's why Zikorin is considered to be the antithesis of shikha, of forgetfulness, a connection. When two people remember each other, and they remember each other well, and there's no forgetting a favor that was done, or forgetting in any other fashion, that demonstrates an achdus, a unity between you and the experience that you've had. And especially when it comes to positive experience in life, it's critical to remember them and not forget. So often we forget. I remember there was David Leib Meckler, was the editor-in-chief of the Tag Morgen Journal, which was a daily Yiddish newspaper my father worked for until it closed down in 1972, and that's when he opened the Allgemeine. So he was the editor-in-chief, David Laman Meckler. Some of you Chassidim may know David Laman Meckler, not from the Tag Morgen Journal, but you'll look in the Sefer Zachrenis of the Frierdiker Rebbe, you'll see, written by, composed by, or prepared by, adapted by David Laman Meckler, because he actually would go into the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe insisted someone like him was a secular Jewish journalist, and they would publish excerpts which would later become the Sefer Zachrenis. So Meckler had a certain kiruv from the Frierdiker Rebbe. My father, of course, worked for him, and he was a very powerful man in the 50s and the 60s when Yiddish journalism was at its peak due to the readership, because of the immigrants coming. But then after the Tag Morgen Journal closed down, and my father took Meckler and a few others from the Tag Morgen Journal, the old veteran journalists, to work for the Allgemeine. So my father once worked for this most powerful man, now he was working for my father. When he passed away, and I don't remember what year it was, the Rebbe asked my father, my father of course went to the funeral, to the Levaya, my Rebbe asked my father, how many people were there? So my father said, Kama minyan, barely a minyan. And the Rebbe said, when he was needed, everyone stood online. When he was needed, everybody stood. We sometimes forget. Some of you may be aware of the fact that the Kramers who helped the Frierdiker Rebbe come to America and then helped them Kashmir financially. So every Friday till this day, the Secretariat calls Kramers, because that's what the Rebbe insisted. Every Friday that they were called from the Rebbe's office to thank them, to wish them good Shabbos. The idea of memory is a powerful, powerful thing in a world where today we easily forget as soon as we don't need somebody, or we move on and we live in a different world. So Zachor on its own, and the Rebbe speaks in Sichas, even without the word Amolek, has a message. And we say Parsha Zachor to remember. And on a personal note, someone who's Zachor to be a chayzer, to remember. What was a chayzer? Zachor. It was all about remembering and retaining that which we heard from the Rebbe, especially Shabbos and Yontif, when there were no recordings made. And it was all about that deep concentration necessary to become totally bottled, to be able to absorb the Rebbe's words and not allow your own mind and your own interests to get in the way. So when you think of memory in that context, it broadens the whole theme of the application, the Chassidus Applied of memory, in a far, far broader way. And of course, shikha, its alter ego, is the opposite. It's the disconnect. It's the forgetfulness. Now, of course, here when it comes to Amalek, because of what Amalek did, we must never forget. So even when we erase his name, we remember what we're erasing. We remember that Amalek represented everything that causes a person to become lethargic and frozen and paralyzed and doubtful, which of course is many, many ways worse than making the wrong decision. Ein simcha kataras asfekas, we're told. There's no joy like resolving doubts. So even if one makes a choice, but at least they made a move, that's a sign of life. So you may have taken the wrong path, so you can correct it. But when you get frozen, that is a sign of death. And once one is frozen in the type of state of kedidus and doubt, and you can't make a move, that's when you get yourself into very deep type of trouble. So the Zachor is to remember and not to forget. The memory itself is a form of vitality, and forgetfulness is also a form of death. The death of whatever it is that one should remember. Many other lessons can be derived from this, and of course, as we go to Purim, even though it's true that the miracle happened, but we still remember. We don't forget, and we remember what led up to the miracle, and we recreate the events that happened, even the sad events. And we remember them, we recognize them, and we recognize, of course, the redemption that came as a result of it. So memory is the way we connect to our souls, the way we connect to transcendence, the way we connect to the divine, the way we connect to history, to our ancestors, to our parents and grandparents. And of course, with Sheish Chassidus, every day we say the 6 memories, including Zachor Yetzias Mitzrayim. All the word Zachor is Zachor again and again in that type of powerful Zachor. Of course, we all know the din that when a person learns Torah, they're not allowed to forget. The different halachas, what happens if a person forgets inadvertently. Why? Because when it comes to holiness and Kedusha, sacred things, one has to always retain them. The things we have to forget are the things that are temporary, that are meaningless, or that are shallow or superficial. We may have to experience them for whatever reason we have to go through life, but you don't have to remember them forever. You don't have to remember the meals you ate last week, or 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago. But things that are eternal, eternity by definition is a form of permanence, and permanence is essentially the concept of memory and Zachor. Okay. Now, let's move into, firstly we'll go do some follow-up, and then we'll go into some new topics. Interesting episode here for you. And let's begin with the follow-up. Firstly, I spoke last week in the Chassidus Question of the week on the concept of Tzimtzum. I want to briefly add something which I should have added then, about the applied element of it. So the question there was, what was the definition of Tzimtzum? Is it condensing? Is it contracting? Is it diminishing? Is it covering? Is it removing? So I focused on the topic that Tzimtzum Harishon, especially Chassidus says b'derech siluk and not b'derech miyut. The difference being siluk means complete removal. Miyut means diminished. It means not completely removed. But the Alter Rebbe makes it clear that siluk really means helam, but complete helam. So I wanted to just clarify that, number one point. So the Tzimtzum of Seder Shtalshalos is a diminishing. Think of a teacher who diminishes his ideas to be able to convey it to a student that's proportionate or relatively commensurate to the teacher. You don't need a complete siluk or a complete concealment. Excuse me. However, when it comes to an infinite and finite, or if it would be a teacher that's infinitely distant, there needs to be a total silence before he begins to transmit. And that's the difference between the Tzimtzum Siluk and the Tzimtzum of Miyut. But as we said, Tzimtzum is not kipshute, it's not literal, so Siluk really means not literally removed, as the Alter Rebbe speaks in chapter 7, the Shayrichut Vamuna, the second section of Tanya, where rather it means complete concealment, helam v'lei siluk. At the same time, the idea of condensing, so we spoke about the Esis Hadashim, the letters of the trace, or the impression that's left after the Tzimtzum. So I wanted to bring into the Avodah of it, which is the applied Chassidus. So a very interesting sikha, Shabbos Parsha Truma Tov Shin Mem Vov, where the Rebbe speaks about this briefly, but we can derive much from it, and I wanted to just mention that. Tzimtzum in Avodah, the Rebbe says, is Tachlis Habitl, which means Siluk Dugdusha, total removal of oneself, total putting yourself aside, which the Rebbe says in Avodah is in the morning, Moedani. When a person says Moedani, they're putting aside the Ani, they're completely giving their Ani and acknowledging the God that returned the soul, returned Shachzat Bin Nishmasi, and putting everything aside. So that's Tzimtzum. Then comes Esis Shimu. The Rebbe says the Shimu is that to make sure you're not a askupa nedreses, not to be a doormat. And the Tzimtzum, the Rab Marash is mechadish, that the Esis Shimu loy noga b'ma Tzimtzum. So not only does a trace remain, which means that it's not total removal of annihilation of the identity of the individual. One has to be an identity, but the Tzimtzum didn't even affect it. Here's not the place to discuss the details, but the point being is that there's an aspect of the identity of the individual that is not affected by the concealment. And that's stage number 2. After Moedani, the idea of not being complete, it's not an annihilation, it's that there is something that remains. So I think that's very appropriate to applying the idea of Tzimtzum and the Shimu to our personal lives from the Sikh of Truma Tovshin Memvov. At some future time we'll discuss this more in detail, how it affects also the other aspects that all on the dynamics of that state of the beginning of so-called the Big Bang, the Tzimtzum, the Shimu, the Kav, the different opinions on the Kav and so on, and how that all applies to our personal lives. It'll definitely be a fascinating study again in our own psychological development. Next follow-up. We talked about women, Daiton Kalas, Daiton Kala, Noshim Daiton Kala. So let me read a few questions and respond to that. And question number 1. Thank you for beginning to address negative terms about women. Also, Noshin Daitan Kalos is mentioned in connection to why women are exempted from Talmud Torah. Perhaps you can answer this question. The Alter Rebbe talks about the waving of the lulav and affecting strengthening a woman's das. But when the Rebbe speaks about the lulav strengthening das, he doesn't refer to it as strengthening a woman's das. In Sefer HaSichos, the Sikh of Yud Gimel Tishrei Tov Shin Lamed Vov. Is it possible but by then a woman's das has been sufficiently strengthened so she can learn Torah Shebal Peh? Her mind is able to rule over the heart, but where she is not particular, I'm not sure what that means. Since that is a possible angle in the statement of Noshim Daitan Kala, because it facilitates Shalom Bayis, then does that angle remain? Okay. Well, as I explained in the last, let me read a few more questions and then I'll talk about them all together. I had a follow-up question following your explanation of Noshim Daitan Kalas. How does your explanation that Kalas is not a disadvantage, rather it means flexibility, etc., fit with the story of Bruria, the wife of Rab Meir, referring to Rashi and Avodah Zarah Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, is the source, that in order to prove this phrase of Noshim, and the whole thing that he sent one of his students to seduce her to prove the point, and she gave him, then either committing suicide or falling emotionally ill. It says committing suicide there, Rashi says, doesn't this seem to imply a fault in das, that is a deficiency of some sort? You could probably ask the question in better words than I can, but I think the question is clear enough. Okay, so let me address this. As I mentioned then, and let me start with the story with Bruria. So yes, Rashi says there in Avodah Zarah 18b, the story that she dismissed what Chazal said Noshim Daitan Kala, because we know that Bruria herself was a Talmid Chachama. She was a scholar. And many places, different places in Chazal Talmud talk about her great scholarship. So that when she heard that statement, she dismissed it. And her husband, Rab Meir, told her, do not dismiss it because it ultimately will be proven to be true. And the sad ending, I don't want to repeat again. It's a very controversial Rashi, actually, and many people talk about it. As a matter of fact, the Ran on the same Gemara has a different explanation there, because Rashi is coming to explain why Rab Meir left, because he had to escape from the Romans who were searching for him. He had to escape. So Rashi explains that Rab Meir escaped because of the shame that this caused his wife, had caused him, and all that had happened. The Ran says he actually left with Bruria. So clearly there's different approaches of the end of the story of Bruria's life. But regardless, Rashi does say it. So as I pointed out then, I said that when you talk about Tzelem Elokim, the divine image of male and female, they complement each other. When you say Bina, you say to Nitna Be'isha, that a woman has more Bina, has more understanding, has more Maven Dover, Meter Dover, the practical element of intelligence, however you want to describe Bina. What is that saying? It's more than a Ish. Well, that's why men and women are meant to come together. Because the full Tselem Elokim, the full divine image, is only when you have Ish and Isha, Yud K of the Yud and Ish and the Hey of Isha. And that's when the blessing is. That's when he blesses them. And that's how they unite. So clearly, men have something to give to women, and women have something to give to men. They complement each other as being parts of one whole. This isn't about who's better or worse, because they're clearly nothing is inferior in the eyes of God. It's two parts of one divine image. So just like a woman does contribute bina to the husband, that's the simple interpretation of it, the same thing is the other way around. The Kala, I explained, has elements that are positive because it shows on the flexibility, not being ultra-focused. I mentioned autism, which is far higher by men than women because of perhaps that element of das iskashus that may be more by men. But there can also be a negative side to it. Daitan Kala, yes, in situations where they could be easier swayed than a man. So there's always a positive and a negative in any type of situation. But the point was that it's not meant to be taken only in the negative sense, especially when you add to the equation that which I discussed last week, the meaning of kalo, kal, hey, the Arizal, and Chassidus, and the different interpretations of what kal, hey, the hey gvuras, without the hey chsadim. But at the end of the day, as the first questioner asked, it does say in Chassidus that the husband, just like a woman, is made to compensate and add things to a man. The man is also made to yetzer a woman in different things. Like a woman lights candles, the man doesn't light the candles. So why? Because she covers him. And just the same thing is with the man covering the woman when he makes kiddush. So there is the idea that the das chazak, the stronger das that's by a man, because there is the advantage of hiskashus and connection. Das is at the end of the day a MyLife, it's not the chasad. That hiskashus he can pass on to the woman, like you learn about by lulav. I would not say that the Rebbe doesn't bring it because it's the change of times. I would say there's no question as we get closer to the Geula, you have Nekevet to save of Gover, and you have Eishes Chayla Teres Baila, we're reaching a more feminine age where the Lasad Lavu will be Nekevet to save of Gover, which means that the feminine energy will rise to be more dominant. But that's more of the internal energy, whereas today, the masculine energy, which is again another discussion. But absolutely they complement each other, so there's not a problem to understand it that way, and that's why you'll find sometimes a positive. In Brudia's case, yes, she challenged it. She challenged it for whatever reason she did, and it was proven that there are certain elements that have a downside too. Just as I said with Bina. And there's always a positive, and I would say negative but a positive, but there's also, everything has its smilus, and it has its chesronos, and its strengths and its weaknesses. Okay. There were some more questions on this topic. Let me see anything else that's relevant here. In this week's episode, at minute 24, you were saying that the fact that there are male hierarchies out there is man-made and has unfortunately seeped into Jewish institutions as well. But that is not Torah mandated, rather than man-made. This is not true. The Torah clearly demands a male king and not a queen. This is applied in Shulchan Aruch to an appointment of leadership on the community. There were prophetesses, but not female leaders in Klal Yisrael. And no, this isn't man-made. This is so al pi Torah. Well, with all due respect, yes, it's true that men have their roles, and it could be the role of whether it's a Rav or a Chaver in Sanhedrin or a Melech, as you put it, and or a leader of a community. And the fact that a woman does not have that, according to Torah, does not make her less. It's just a different role. Let's just start with that. What I was addressing about male hierarchies is that you have what's seeped into the systems are things that have nothing to do with Torah. There are many things nothing to do with Torah. The mere fact, for example, that you're writing in this way as if like a man is the one in control and is the boss, that's not what it says in Torah. Avram is told to listen to Sarah. Why is the Megillah called Megillah Esther, not Megillah Mordechai Esther, Megillah Esther Mordechai, even though Esther listened to Mordechai? Because in some ways a woman is the leader. And a woman drives the force. So there's plenty of attitudes that human beings pick up. If you're just reading Torah has no problem. Well, the Torah says the Torah. Torah says a Chavis and Hedon has to be male, so be it. And Mashiach will be a male, so be it. That's not about male, it's about what the Eibishter wants. And women have their roles. And there's also the expression, Ein melech b'lei matrinisa, just for the record. A king is not complete without the queen. But Zoh is not complete without Malchus. But once it starts being used by people, you see, I'm a man and I have this position, that's right away a man-made thing. So I think the questioner, even though it's between the lines, is suggesting such a type of use. That's when you start distorting things by taking something that Tater says, the Tater says. I was not addressing what the Tater says. I was addressing how people interpret it. Okay. And finally, there's the question about women as property, which was asked. I want to just make a very critical point when it comes to all these questions. Of course, I deal with it a lot, both in the secular world, even more than in the religious world, because people ask these questions. First of all, we're all property of God. Let's start with that. The Radbaz explains why a person is not allowed to self-mutilate, why you're not allowed to hurt yourself. The Alter Rebbe brings it also in his own halachas and Chesha Mishpat, Hilchas Niske Haguf, is why can't, not hurting another person is understandable. Why can't you hurt yourself? Who are you hurting? It's your property. Because your body is nechasim shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You belong to God, you don't belong to yourself. And therefore you're not allowed to touch in any way yourself, even if no one else is being hurt. God gave you a gift, a pekodin, to take care of, and that's what you have to do. So the concept that we're property should not scare us. A man is property of God's and a woman's a property of God. In the context of when you're talking in a pure context, where it's not being abused, like I just said, you're talking about Heilige Eden, holy Jews that have Yiras Shamayim, and do not use their positions to pull rank and to demonstrate hierarchies, a couple bittul, all these questions don't exist. The fact that al pi halacha you have to determine what is a kedusha in a marriage. Is it an acquisition? Is not trying to compare, God forbid, a woman. A woman is that selam elikim, nekeva zachor, nekeva bara esam. Equals, two halves of one selam elikim. You have to always begin with that. So when you start saying a woman is a man's property, what does that mean? That the selam elikim of the nekeva belongs to the selam elikim of the zachor? Does this make even sense? It means in certain areas, when it comes down to halachas, certain laws, just like you have to determine the property, possessions, and so on, this language is used. But as soon as you start using it out of context, it smacks. It wouldn't sound good to me that I'm the property of somebody else. I'm not the property. But yes, in some ways, as I just said, all humans are property of God. But that doesn't mean property in any demeaning way, in any way that one person can use it. Mechabed ishte yesem megufe. There's also a Shulchan Aruch halacha. So let's start with that din. And then we'll talk about other details. So it's very critical, and I'm specifically being very, very adamant about emphasizing this. There's what the Torah says is what God mandated. That cannot in any way have any type of negative elements to it. It's God's plan. And with bittul, everything works. It's when humans start interpreting and start using it, or start misunderstanding its interpretation, that's where we have problems. And maybe that's part of what the Chassidus Applied is, trying to clarify things from the sources and interpret them not based on our way of using these things. I remember, I didn't even want to mention this, but I'll mention it because I remember it vividly. I remember after Chazara, one Motzei Shabbos, so a guy comes over to me in 770 and says to me, where does it say in the Sichos of the Rebbe that a wife has to listen to her husband? So I said, I saw already that there's something here that's not exactly Motzei Shabbos, 11 o'clock at night. The guy, what's he doing here? So I said to him, I don't know of such sichos. So he starts yelling at me. He says, you're a chayzer, blah, blah, blah. How come you don't know such sichos? The Rebbe says it all the time. I saw he was getting all agitated. So I said, what is this about? So he says, I have a friend whose wife simply refuses to listen to him. Okay, the famous story of the Rebbe Marash, that someone came to the Rebbe Marash, asked for a tikkun for his friend. He said that his friend did something and he wants a tikkun. But he's embarrassed to come to the Rebbe Marash. So that's why he sent me. So the Rebbe Marash smiled and said to him, why did he have to expose himself to you? He could have come to me and said, I have a friend. So I right away understood that this friend that he's talking about is himself. So I decided to mach sich nicht wissendig, and I said to him, completely nonchalantly, I said to him, tell your friend that the first din in Shulchan Aruch in this matter is that a husband has to honor his wife more than himself. That's what the Rebbe brings in the Sichos. And since this is not, personal, because you're only your friend, I'm sure you'll be able to convey it to him in a gentle way. He started yelling at me, which was very clear why. See, this is an example sometimes we call novel b'reshus ha-Torah. I'm not here to judge this guy to know what was going on in his life. Novel b'reshus ha-Torah, you take Torah and you start using it for your own agenda. It's very vital that we all know that Sheichi di'aver ene chachamim, even the smartest. The Torah calls them chachamim. And tzaddikim, yisal of divri tzaddikim. Because bias and prejudice does things like that. That's why we need to have a mashpia, a rav, someone to run by ideas. And these ideas, especially when it comes to women and men, so much of it is so distorted due to human interpretation, human application. And maybe naturally so. People want control. People want dominance. And they use it. And they say, that's what it says in the Torah. That's what it says here. That's what it says there. It says a lot of things. And I'm not denying anything that it says. The question is how it's being used and what the context is. Okay. Let me see. What else can we talk about here? I think I covered this topic. Follow up. So now let us go to one more follow up I'm going to do about the 12 steps. There's plenty on that, so I'll just do one. I am currently in the program of recovery from addiction. It's a spiritual program called the 12 Steps. One of the things that I'm taught in my program is that it's not enough to white knuckle it. In other words, it's not okay to just abstain from indulging in my addiction as long as I still have an obsession for that substance. Eventually I will fall back into my addiction. So my solution has to also deal not only with my willpower, with my obsession, but also with my obsession. In Tanya, I'm taught to practice Hiskafia. Hiskafia literally means to refrain, or to force yourself, Hiskafia, to kaifa, to force yourself to stop something. Refrain. The way I understand that now is simply to abstain from indulging in that substance. However, I don't see where Chassidus addresses my obsession with that substance. Is it fair to say that the Alter Rebbe wants me to fight for the rest of my life by white-knuckling it, or does the Alter Rebbe also give me a way to have some reprieve? Also, in my program, I am taught the importance of having a conversation with Hashem, personal prayer. Is this something that Chabad Chassidus encourages? I was always under the impression that Avodas HaTfilah is in reference to the 3 communal prayers that we pray every day. In Yeshiva, we were never taught to turn to the Eibishter in times of distress and ask him for help. Okay. So Tanya talks partially about refrain, obviously, but Tanya also talks about many other aspects to how to channel a person's different desires and temptations. So I'm not sure, you read part of Tanya. It's not just about white-knuckling it. Yes, there's a big part of the battle goes on. We fight the battle, but we also have Ava Mesuteres, we have the hidden love, and we have ways to access. If Tanya just said that, he could have said in one chapter the whole thing. Life is a battle, and the rest of your life you're going to have to battle it. It's very clear that Tanya is far more comprehensive than that. And actually Tanya, I would say, is even more comprehensive than the 12 steps. Without taking away from any of its benefits that we've spoken about, nevertheless, it has in it a whole bunch of methods. And when you follow it, as the Alter Rebbe says in the introduction to Tanya, it gives answers to all challenges, you can come away with a very, very solid and comprehensive game plan and blueprint for how to deal both with refraining and with obsession and so on and so forth. As far as the second point, it's interesting that that's what your approach is. Actually, tefillah min ha-Torah, the araisa is only when you're in need. So actually, the exact opposite is true. In times of distress, that's exactly when we daven. Later, the Chacham or Masakin that we should have 3 tefillahs and has other elements to it that not just bakoshes tzrachim, not just to ask for our needs or in times when we're with his needs, but also to praise God and the other aspects of thanksgiving and so on, that other aspects of tefillah. So tefillah actually was meant to be precisely that, to emotionally reach out in a time of need and cry to God. That's the real core of tefillah. That's where it all begins with. And so it's interesting, you say mentioning it the 12 steps, but the fact of the matter, this is fundamental Torah, that prayer is a way that we talk to God, a way of healing, a way of reaching, a way of emoting, and developing ourselves emotionally. Okay. There are more questions on this topic. Since it's a big topic, I'll just do others at another point. Let's go to a new question, and that is the Rebbe's approach to disagreement. What is one to do when faced with disagreements at work, shlichus, or in mezdis, in organizations? How does the Rebbe direct us in addressing machlekas, which is divisiveness or arguments and so on? So, we all know that this was a theme. Unfortunately, we live in a world where there is disagreements. Disagreement itself, per se, is normal. Why? Because people have different opinions, so you may have disagreement. The question is if it flares into a machlekes, a real pain, a real bitter, or angry, or personal war. That's a whole different story. And we know how much Torah so adamantly rejects and adamantly criticizes any type of machlekes. Machlekes is considered one of the biggest curses. Shalom, on the other hand, lo motza HaKadosh Baruch Hu klei machzik bracha ela hashalom. Unity. Unity is the source of brachas. Baruchenu avinu kolanu ka'echad. On and on and on. And the Rebbe Sichas is filled. You know how much the Rebbe cried and spilled his own guts, if you can even call it that, over the aggravation over machlekes, especially something close to the Rebbe. And we all are some way guilty of this. And we have to do something about it in every possible way. So it's a topic that's not easy to talk about on one hand, but one that's critical. Now, there's many, many places the Rebbe addresses it, and sometimes in very strong and harsh ways, to the point of even explaining the stories of, which I don't even want to repeat, the Rebbe would say how Anshe David and Anshe Avshalom, that even good people, when they're not united, things can happen that are not positive. And on the other hand, bad people, when they're united, there's a bracha. Because God blessed bracha. That's why the Eibishter Der HaFloga had to confuse their languages, because there's a blessing when there's Achdus. Achdus brings blessing even to bad people. We don't need more proof to what happened back 70 years ago in Germany. So I wanted to just point out a few tzedlach that I recently came my way, and a few places in Igros Kodesh. First in the Igros Kodesh, there's two strong letters that are kedai to read, and we all can use the reminders of this. One is in Chelik Ches, the Rebbe's letters, Chelik Ches, page 139, and the other is Chelik Yud Aleph, page volume 11, page 218. But there are two notes that I wanted to read that came my way. One of them, which is the following, and I'll read it, the Ksaviyat from the Rebbe. I'll even show it to you. The Ksaviyat of the Rebbe. This is a copy of the Rebbe's handwriting. Just if you want to read it a little closer, I'll just leave it up for a moment more. So here's what the Rebbe says. Mefursum, it's known, shebekol sichsuch, on every disagreement, shebein b'nei Adam, between human beings, hineni shalech l'rav meir hira. I send it off to a Rav, a rabbi that's a meir hira, not just a rabbi, but a Rav that's an active service of giving directives. The Rebbe continues, K'sheshelim esi al dvar eze inyan, when I am asked about any subject, like, for example, kinyan bias or kiyetze b'zeh, like buying a building, for example, or kiyetze b'zeh, or similar, in aglat and signan, I'm asked about it in a very simple and straight signan, without any hinei glat. I also answer directly and straightforward. Upshita, underlined twice, and it's obvious. She'ima case of MyLife imanu, if the writer conceals from me, sheyesh b'zeh sichsuch, that this is involved, machlekes involves an argument, a conflict, harelo yonisi b'zeh klal. It says, I did not answer at all. It's very strong words. First of all, the Rebbe directs straight to Rav Meir Hira and does not get involved. And in other words, not to use the Rebbe to be on any side of machlekes. And if he was told, the Rebbe says, he would never have answered that way. So in other words, you concealed from me, the Rebbe is saying, and therefore it's like I never answered. So don't use my answer, in other words, for whatever it is. I don't know the details. Doesn't really relevant here. It's not about to understand. It's about how we apply this. Another note. This looks like from the early years. This is a very painful one. It's a shliach writing to the Rebbe that he senses that he's only causing agmas nefesh, aggravation, and that he's not really working properly in the shlichus. And he also sees that the Rebbe, it doesn't seem that the Rebbe is happy with what's going on. My heart tells me, the shliach writes, that if I wasn't here in this place, the Rebbe could have made shinuyim, changes, but the Rebbe doesn't want to cause me any pain and aggravation, so the Rebbe is leaving him alone. That's why I'm here to notify the Rebbe that I'm ready, buchen mezuman, I'm fully ready any moment to leave my avodah here and to give the job to hatev mimeni, to someone better than me. And I will not, chas v'shalom, God forbid, have any complaints or any arguments. and it's definitely for the good of the mice of the Indian, because it's definitely not healthy when you see that we're going to a place and it's not bringing anything stronger and growth and so on. Sacha Kol, he sums up, the success of this organization is now placed in the hands of the Rebbe. And the Rebbe can do and repair as he sees fit. That this message should should blossom and thrive, both spiritually and materially. In every possible way. And I, from my end, completely agree to whatever the Rebbe will say and suggest, and I stand with God's help to fulfill the Rebbe's sivui with blishum kunsen v'dreidlach, without any how do we call that? Without any misgivings, without any playing games and stuff like that. The Rebbe writes like this. He circles the word sheyemer v'yatzi, whatever the Rebbe will say and advise. So the Rebbe is saying, I'm saying and advising, he circled, Shahu ba'atzmi dafki yetev mimeni. That this person who's writing, he should become that's better than him. He said, appoint someone better than me. So the Rebbe says, you, dafka, should be the one that's better than me. So you should become better. And then the Rebbe continues, and now, Yasu Zabla, make a Zabla, Zebeir v'Zebeir, which means both sides who are the disagreement should each choose someone, and then they choose a third party to be a Rav with them. So you have three. Levarer hatainus uliyashnom, to clarify the arguments and all the different issues, and to straighten them out. And then the Rebbe concludes, V'achakach tzorich lisachet, and afterwards you have to unite, ba'ofen shel autonomia, in a form of autonomy, v'loy livloya ishas re'eyu, and one should not swallow up the other. I think the answer speaks for itself. And of course we know that answers are to the one that wrote it, and I understand it'll be qualified, you can't apply this to other situations, but you know something, there's certain logic you could apply. If the Rebbe says in a note that you mafursim, every argument I sent to Rav Moirei, and you see it again and again, that's not just Heirah Pratis. If the Rebbe have exceptions in situations he did, that's the Rebbe's business. But clearly you see here an approach which, if we just had the bittul, instead of thinking about what we want, what the Rebbe wants, this would solve a lot of issues. I just wanted to read that, and everyone should fit the hat to whom it belongs. I'm speaking to myself just as I speak to anyone out there, and hopefully we can all create Shalom al Yisrael, which will be the keli for the bracha and the keli for the geula. Okay. Let's move now to the next subject. This was actually a question that came in from a teenager a few weeks ago. The C-teens were all here. And one of them wrote me this question, so I thought it was appropriate to read. Let me read that right now. Thank you for making MLC. I have found the site to be very informative. MLC is Meaningful Life Center, our organization, meaningfullife.com. I have found the site to be very informative and helpful. This past week, I spent a wonderful Shabbos in Crown Heights, along with many other C-teens from around the world. On Friday night, the rabbi told over a story of the Lubavitch Rebbe, and must have spoken about him at least 5 times. As well as Shabbos day, one of the children of the house we were eating by told the story of the Rebbe. Why does Chabad make such a big deal about him? Yes, he was a great man, helped many people, and maybe even did a miracle. Though, there were many other great rabbis, including one in the Chassidic, and more specifically Chabad dynasty, including ones in the Chassidic and more specifically Chabad dynasty. 2, would it not make more sense to get excited about someone that was still alive? Why do people go to the oil? There are many living rabbis around. So I felt because it's coming definitely from a sincere place, he enjoyed it. So let me respond, even though this is a topic I have addressed in the past. It really gets down to, we have to have the healthiest. I don't know if this teen is listening to this, but I'm saying it to all of us. We have to have the words to be able to explain this. When we share stories about the Rebbe, obviously it's a beautiful thing to do, and you don't have to every time start explaining from scratch who the Rebbe is. But I think we have to have at our fingertips words and asis and letters and words and ideas that can easily explain what a Rebbe is, especially now 21 years from Gimel Tammuz. The fact that Chabad is thriving and there's a C-teens, The mere fact that it's 2,000 teens in Times Square and the Kiddush Hashem that they created tells you something is living. Something is living. And we know that at Tzaddik, it's called Gambe Misos and Kruyim Chayim. You have to be able to explain this to every person. Am Yisrael Chai is not dependent on what we see with bodies. It's dependent on what we see with Ruchnis. So firstly, the role of a Rebbe, on a very basic level, is to have someone who is not attached and not defined. And this is what the Alter Rebbe wrote actually to the ministers in Hebrew when they in the interrogation, that people are negei b'davar, they're subjective and they're biased. And you need someone who's beyond the ego and beyond all of that can help direct and guide us. In the language of Chassidus, a mamutza mechaber. Someone who's transparent in the sense of selflessness that can help direct and guide us to what we should live up to our missions. If not, we are usually pulled in the direction of whatever the material interests and needs we have. So Rebbe has that role. Now the Rebbe's role in doing this is not just a physical one. It's how he teaches. It's his message. That lives on. So we may not understand Gimel Tammuz, which is not the discussion right now. That's not what he's asking. That lives on. And that is the core inspiration of thousands and thousands of people. How is that possible? Just like Moshe Rabbeinu lives on. And we learn Torah, and we learn Zichru Teiris Moshe Avdi. Again, Zichru, Lashon Zakaron. Because it lives on. Obviously, having a Rebbe that you can see, a Rebbe that you can celebrate with, it, you can dance with, you can go to a kofis with, Shoshani, Yom Kippur, regular Mincha Ma'ariv, and so on, is obviously more powerful. But the power of the Rebbe is not the Gashmis of the Rebbe, it's the Ruchnis of the Rebbe. Chayim Ruchnim, not Chayim Psorim. And that lives on absolutely. And it's not something difficult to explain to teenagers. You show them how the Jewish people live on. What it lives on, the spirit lives on. The teachings live on. The inspiration. You can have people who are the presidents of the countries and they don't inspire us. And you can have messages and lessons that inspire us even though we may not see the person physically. And I think it's important to be able to explain that in a simple asis. Why we get excited? Because yes, when you get excited by that cause, because the Rebbe is representing the cause, a divine cause. It's not about a human being that we just happen to like. This is a critical component. We're not talking about a type of demagogue or in any way a type of individual that happens to be great. You're talking about bittul. You're talking about a person who's a selfless leader that helps us discover who we are. And I would tell this teen, the excitement you experience, that Friday night and Shabbos night and all the time being here, that excitement is your excitement. But a Rebbe was the one that was the catalyst that encouraged it. As the Rebbe gives many examples, he's like the match, but the flame is inside your soul. And a Rebbe has the ability to ignite that aspect of your soul. Okay. Let me go to a few questions that I kept pushing off in time to finally get to them. Relevance of chapter 29 in Tanya. How do we apply today the concept of berating our animal souls as explained in Tanya chapter 29? Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I enjoy your classes and especially how relevant you make all parts of Chassidus. I've been studying Tanya and after I learned chapter 29, I was wondering to myself why we hear so little about this. Is it because we are too weak to berate ourselves and focus on our flaws and we therefore try doing only a positive approach? Or am I missing something? And really this is something we should be practicing more and thinking about more often. Please shed light on this topic. Yeah. So Perek, just to sum up for those that are not aware, if you read Perek Chavtes and Tanya, after the Alter Rebbe gives different eitzes of how to deal with the animal soul, so then he begins in chapter 29. He says, "What about that? Your body is like a piece of wood, and the fire does not ignite. The soul's fire does not ignite. So sometimes what you need to do is shake up the person, just like a piece of wood. If the fire is not catching, you shake it up. You shake the fire. You keep moving until something catches." And he goes on about literally berating, meshukitz, manuvel, all the different expressions he uses of how we berate our animal soul in a way like a shock and wake-up call to try to get it to somewhat respond to the inspiration of the divine soul. So we berate it. Yes, the word is berating. Obvious question is, we all know, on a very basic common sense level, berating someone and humiliating them does not work. Even if it works for the short term, it's not a healthy approach. The Alter Rebbe himself said earlier, demoralization of atzvus is not healthy. Because if you berate someone, they feel weak. The Alter Rebbe said, chapter 26, he said, that if you'll be weak because you'll be feeling demoralized, how could you fight a battle when you feel? So he can't be contradicting himself. So even though in chapter 30 he qualifies it and says that even though atzrus is taka a negative thing, but for that moment, which is meant to, for that moment to shake up, is in order to lead you, and especially when you're already feeling bad about yourself. In B'milah D'Alma, in chapter 30, he says this. So even though you're feeling, since you're feeling directed and guided, which itself is a fascinating psychological insight, that if you're already feeling bad about something in the physical world, why don't you harness and channel it and to use it to demoralize the animal soul so the divine soul can emerge. So there is that momentary need to do that, or momentary possibility to do that. So on one hand, yes, you have to be very careful using chapter 29, the person who's doing the berating, because it doesn't say to go berate others. It does not say go to somebody else until they're saying it to yourself. But to yourself also, as the Friedrich Rebbe said, you have to be careful not to speak Lashon Hara on yourself. So that's why great care has to be taken, and it's true in our day and age, because there is abuse, verbal abuse, people not necessarily with holy intentions who are demoralizing and humiliating, to be careful not to humiliate yourself. But you see, even in this world today, and I'll use an example from Lahavdil, let's say, sports and athletes, you'll see coaches, and the same thing as in music and in artistry and other areas, coaches who literally will yell and scream at different players to get them motivated. Now, some did it in unhealthy ways and do it in unhealthy ways. We're not talking about that. But more importantly, you'll sometimes see an athlete do that to himself. Like he makes a mistake in the way he hits a ball. You'll see a tennis player hit a ball in the bad way, and they'll berate themselves. And actually, what it does is it gets energy going to become better. So when it's gauged properly and done properly, you can see many applications how sometimes, yes, building confidence by encouraging yourself is one way, but sometimes saying, how could I be done such a bad move? Not to dwell on the past, but to improve. So people who really reach excellent levels, you'll see there's two methods they use when they have to achieve that excellence. Sometimes it's getting themselves pepped up. You can do it. But sometimes it's saying, look at what the last move, and you live with it and you review it. Not dwell on it, but review it and say, how could you have made such a bad move? You're much better than that. And that takes on a shape that can be seemingly berating, but it can have a positive, powerful effect because it shakes you up, like a wake-up call. Now, to do it with others, that has to be done very, very, very carefully, and Tanya doesn't even talk about that. As a matter of fact, in chapter 30, it says you should not have a shvar ruach b'chol kol adam. And you should not, because you don't know you can't put yourself in, you can't judge someone, you can't put yourself in their shoes. Meaning you can't judge someone unless you put themselves in their shoes. But sometimes even with a friend, if the situation is fitting, sometimes you could shake somebody up. Not with, I wouldn't say with using bad words or in any way the meaning or in any way insulting someone, but sometimes it is a shake-up. But that's a separate discussion. I would not apply Tanya chapter 29 to that. There's one more point which is really not here, the time and space of the Alter Rebbe, how the Rebbe explains chapter 29, the way that Chassidus explains it. The Rebbe explains 29 talking about klipas nega, which is really for all of us, and chapter 30 going already into shalosh klipas atmeis. And the Chassidus explains it the other way around. We'll talk about it another time. I wanted to discuss it, but time is limited. But the point I want to make, the reason I'm mentioning it is because it's also, the Rebbe has an answer as well in chapter 29, that first he's talking even to the Shoyim, and then he's talking to Beinanim. So there's two parts there as well. But the bottom line is, especially with Beinani, a person who's able to take it. So he's able to berate yourself. So you have to really gauge. I would not say you should just go ahead and knock yourself. If you do something bad, the Rebbe's approach is hes chadas, move on and move forward. But there are times, especially when you're at a level where it may help, and because you're knocking yourself, not to knock yourself, but you're knocking yourself in order to become better, that there it would be applicable. One more question, and then we'll go to the Chassidus question and to the essays. And I want to mention, since I didn't mention that, not because I forgot to mention, the new essays are being read and judged and evaluated, so everything is going as planned, and you will hear from us. So I'm just reporting that everything is in action. Inspiration when not in Jewish community. My family recently moved to a small town where there is no synagogue and no other Jewish families. How can I stay connected when there are no resources around to do so? Well, this is something that the Rebbe addressed many times, especially in the context of Shlichus. Mitzugebunden eben fällt man nicht unten. That's the expression. The story with Meir and Primer Schlaner, that when you're tied above, you don't fall below. To be in a community where there are challenges like that, you have to go on the offense. You can't just expect to do nothing and not be influenced by a community that doesn't have any connection, at least in a revealed way. You have to see yourself as an agent that Hashem put you there, and you have to do things to inspire others. When you are in that type of mode, and generally speaking, when you're in a mode of exuding, I did the tarid lepolit le-mivla, when you're in a mode of exuding, you don't absorb. So the best defense is offense. That's how you stay connected. Now, specifically, that can mean maybe having a share with some people in the community, start learning together. You could have a share with someone from a different community. Today, with Skype and on phones and so on, there's many, many ways to have classes and so on. Especially for children, you have to keep that fire burning. And the fact that you're in a place like that should only motivate you to be even more proactive and more vigilant in that approach, because that's the key. Now, whether to make a decision to live in a place like that, where there's no synagogue and other Jewish families, that's a decision that you're not really asking, but that decision also has to be weighed, whether it's a wise decision. But if you're in a situation where you have no choice for whatever reason, family reasons or other reasons, that is the way the Rebbe taught us. Offense. See yourself in some way as an emissary, as an ambassador. It doesn't have to be official, not official, but you feel that you are a Jew in this place in order to inspire others. It's not going to be always easy, but that's how you build it. And as you find one person, and then that person begins to affect others, and slowly you can create a whole grassroots movement. Let us now go to the Chassidus question, which is, does God need us? I've heard some rabbis say that God needs us, while other rabbis vehemently disagree, arguing that this statement is sacrilegious. Can you please clarify the issue? So let me share a story that happened with myself, and then we'll clarify as best to my ability. A number of years ago, I was invited to a seminar on affluence and religion. And different rabbis, distinguished rabbis, were invited to Cambridge University. And we all delivered our papers. And then there was one prominent rabbi that was asked to conclude, say some inspiring words, and he did, and he talked a lot about, does God need us? Yes, how much God needs us. There was another one of the rabbis, without mentioning names, who felt it was his role to rebut this rabbi, because when we delivered the papers, that's what you did. You delivered a paper, then there were either the advisors or the listeners or others that were able to ask questions and challenge. That's how it's done in these type of seminars. So here he went and began to rebut and say that God doesn't need, God is complete in every perfect way. The concept of God needing us is psychobabble. It doesn't make any sense, not from a Maimonidean point of view, not from a Torah point of view. God doesn't need anything. We need God. God doesn't need us. That was the gist of it. The moderator felt that the second rabbi had somewhat humiliated the first rabbi who had said God needs us. So he writes me a note. He wants me to weigh in and rebut the rebutter. I wrote back to him, why are you giving me this great honor? Why don't you do it? Just give someone else. He says, you can do a good job. Fine. Well, before I knew it, he after he finished, the rebutter finished, he gave me the mic. You press a button, like the red light goes on, or whatever it is, that gives you now the floor. So I said the following. I said, I'm not perhaps a great professor or scholar as the other rabbi, but I will say that this is a classic disagreement in Torah. You have a concept called Aveda Tzerech Geveya. Aveda Tzerech Geveya means that Aveda, Avadatem es Hashem Elokechem, the service that we do, Aveda, the service that we Jews do, we humans do, Tzerech Geveya is not just Tzerech Hedyet, it's not just for us, for the good of people, but it's also Tzerech Geveya, good for Geveya, for heaven itself. I'll soon cite the sources, and there are two opinions on the matter. As a matter of fact, there are entire discussions on it. So why are we going into a whole debate? Just quote those things, and clearly there are those that there are rabbis and there are sages that clearly say, yes, Aveda Tzedek Geveya, and they prove it with many different chazal. God needs us. You may need to explain what it means, but it definitely says so. Then there are others and other places that indicate that God is not, that God is indifferent, and is not affected by our actions. Anyway, afterwards, the rabbi that rebutted the first rabbi came over to me, and I said, and more than that, I cited the sources, which I'm going to do in a moment. I said it's also in Chassidus, in Ayin Beis, in Ayin Hey, Tzav Ayin Hey, which I'll soon cite. It talks about it at length and discusses it and actually reconciles between the two. Anyway, afterwards, that rabbi came over to me very upset. How could I say that? God is complete. And then he suddenly blurts out and he says, the Rebbe also once told me something like that. And he told me that he once wrote an article for the Yiddish Shehem, where rebutting that concept that God needs us. And the Rebbe, he says, wrote all over the page. The Rebbe would edit the Yiddish Shehem in English. Rabbi Chadikov edited in Yiddish. And the Rebbe wrote that you're entering into Ben Harim Gevayim, which means between great mountains, a discussion of Aveda Tzedek Geveya, whether Aveda is needed and above, but Geveya Tzedek needs us. And instead of getting into it, better not write about this and write about a different topic. So I asked him if he still has the Rebbe's note. He says, I didn't save it, but I remember it vividly. And I still don't understand till today what the Rebbe wanted. So I told him, look, one thing is for sure, I feel good that I'm on the Rebbe's side here, and I feel the same, what I said was based on, even though I didn't know about this tzedek. So this topic is a topic, but let's address it from the way it should be addressed, which is sources. Just to talk about God needs us, how do we know? So everything is in Torah. So let's begin from the sources. Where's the first place of Aveda Tzedek Geveya? I looked and researched. The first source is a Ramban. And Tetzaveh, we read a few chapters, Choftes Memvov, and Rabbeinu B'chaye. The Ramban is the earliest source that I was able to find. Maybe there's more. And he makes it very clear, Aveda Tzedek Geveya, not just Tzedek Chedir. In other words, it's not just V'shachanti B'seichem. He talks about there's the Eibishter Shechina. It's not just for us that God rests among us for our benefit, but it also has a benefit to God. That's what he says. Rebbeinu B'chai elaborates. Then we come Mareches. There's a sefer called Mareches El Lakus from Rab Peretz ben Rab Yitzchak HaKayan. The Rebbe actually has a letter in Igris Kodesh. I think it's in volume 2. I don't remember what page. Maybe page 41. It's the Rabbi Avram Hechtel of Hashalom, where he asks about the Mareches El Lakus and the Pirush HaChayit on the Mareches. So this was the Mareches El Lakus was lived in the 14th century. So he's a little. The Rebbe writes in his man Ramban, but it's right after the Ramban. And he was a teacher of the Ran and the Rivash. So we're talking about, of course, great men. And the Pirush HaChayit, which is Rabbi Yehuda Chaim ben Rabbi Yaakov, on Mareches El Lakus. Chassidus brings Mareches, as the Rebbe brings in that letter, especially around the opinions about the Spheres, whether there's the energies or it's the containers and so on. Then Avedus HaKedesh from Rab Meir ibn Gabbai, the classic from the 15th century, in his introduction, and Shara Aveda chapter 3. And all of this is cited and explained at length by the Shalah, none other than the Shalah and Shar HaGadol. This is a discussion, and they bring, especially Avedus HaKedesh, cited by the Shalah, both sides. That on one hand, there are many verses that seem to suggest God needs us and God is affected by us. Then you have the Mamar Chazal, Ma ichpas lei, im tzedakta ma titan lei. What does he care? Whether you shech this way or that way. And if you do good, what does it add to him? Because God is shleimus dekula, he's the complete, and doesn't need anything. And it's l'tzarefes abriyas, the whole mitzvahs, l'kol mitzvahs le'nitna l'tzarefes abriyas, in order to refine us, to bind us, to connect us. So you have these contradictions. Avedus HaKedesh writes, and I'm citing straight from Avedus HaKedesh in Perek Gimel. How does he reconcile it? He says the following words. So I'm quoting from one of the Maimorim, which I'll soon cite in Chassidus. So he says like this. Ache shehirich v'hichriach, from Maimor Chazal v'oid kam Maimorim, that there's Aveda Tzedek Geveya, and he asks questions from the Pesukim and the Chazal that contradict that, and he explains that what it says, v'chima ichpas lei, hu al odin, that what it says, and that does he care about us? He says, hu al odin yochid sherish hashroshim delay loy ichpas lei klal. When you're talking about odin sherish hashroshim, it's like atzmos in the language of Chassidus. Al zeis hakavana bo kol apsukim ahem gamkein. In other words, there in Sheresh Hashloshim, the Odin, because the Odin Yochid Sheresh Kol Hashloshim, there it's not ichpas. It doesn't affect. It doesn't in any way touch him. Omnam the Tzerech HaKovid, but the Kvedish Al HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as his language, Lashpi Al HaRoshim El Yenim. Chassidus explains what all this means. I'll soon give you the sources. Liyachid Reisha Machshavas B'Seifa. There he uses these words. There. I'm just reading. There it does affect. Kikein hoya harotzen hatoyer v'achefetz hakodesh seirach gomer hu. Seirach gomer, not just need, absolute, total necessity. And the way the Shalah explains it is that the Vedas HaKedesh is basically saying that Natzilus, and Natzilus is absolutely Vedas Seirach Gevei. Higher than Natzilus, it's not. And he brings there from the Chayat and other commentaries who say you can't say even on Atzilus, you have to say that's on lower levels. So number one is there's this discussion, and I just gave the sources. Now comes Chassidus. And here you'll see the Chiddush of Chassidus in a subject beyond what all these Mukubalim say that I just cited. What does Chassidus say? So you have in several Maimorim, let me begin and just give a few sources. In the Maimon Loitia Mishakela, in Teira Eir from the Alter Rebbe, there he says, "Vavadim es Hashem lekechem" is not for the Eibishter; it's for Mamshech and Havaya into lekechem. So drawing down the dimension of the divine that's transcendent into the divine that's within existence. That's in Loitia Mishakel and cited in other places. In the Maimer Va'ati Yisrael Tovkuf Samach Beis, and same thing you have in Yonim, Maimori Admur Azok in Yonim page. Do I have the page here? I don't have the page, but it's there. Talks about it. There he goes into a whole thing that. The same question he asks, God is complete, what does he need? He says that we're serving like an Eved, and Eved does things that the Melech does, well, it's not his covet to do. So we do it in his place, so to speak. So it's not filling a need, it's more serving the work that the Eibishter would have done, and different levels of Avodim, as he explains. Okay. Then in the Maimer Bolok, in Lekutei Teira, Doloi Hibet Oven, there he adds, and this is the key Chassidus Chiddush, that the Eibishter Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu Liyis Le'Dira B'Tachtenim. He desired Adira B'Tachtenim. He says there, desire has no explanation. In other places we know the Lashon is, the Alter Rebbe says, a Taivan stuck in Kasha. There's no question. He desired, but he desired Adira B'Tachtenim. So therefore he desired that he should, that this need. So he doesn't need it, but he desired it. And therefore when we fulfill it, we're fulfilling his desire. So it's not a shleimus, it's not because he's missing something. It's because he desired, and desire doesn't have to have a logical explanation. In Shmos Chelik Beis Lekutei Sichos, he explains this somewhat that it's not mitzad shleimus, it's mitzad desire. But let's take this further, because he doesn't really go spell it out in Maimon Bolok in detail. So we have a series of Maimorim, and we'll start here with number one, Maimorim of Vavadim es Hashem lekechem and Kisalve, all in Parsha Mishpatim. We have an Eira Teira Mishpatim page 1600, Aleph Kuf Samach Vav Zayin, that's 1666 and 67. Page 3025. Veschanan page, it's all Eira Teira, 388. And Ba'aleischa page, Eira Teira page 421. And then the same thing is the Maimorim Tofresh Chav Zayin, Tofresh Chav Tes from the Rebbe Marash. And then there is the Maimorim that come afterwards, which are very critical here. Maimorim of, first of all, Hemshech Ayin Beis, the Maimer Vayikra and Tzav Ayin Hey in volume 2, Tze'eno Reno Tofresh Ayin Zayin, and the Rebbe Chazad that in Tofshin Mem, Seis Teira Se'ela Tofresh Ayin Ches, and Tofshin Mem, and of course there's like Yitiyah Mishakela, Tofshin Yud Beis, and I believe also B'Shah Sheikdimu Tofshin Yud Beis. All these talk about this union in different details. Also allowed V'hoya Ekev Ateres. And is there anything else I want to add here? Let's see, sources wise. In Eira Teira also page 1000, Mishpatim page 1219. Okay. So there's a few things that are critical that he says there. He speaks like the Vedas HaKedesh, he quotes the Vedas HaKedesh, but then there's a few chidushim that are added in Chassidus and says that even though it's true that mainly in Atzilus is Seder Geveya, that's where there's a need, both not just the kelim, but also the eris. Yet, and higher than Atzilus, there's no need, because God is beyond need there. And yet, I'm going to read a lashon from Eira Teira Nach. That's what I wanted to add. Eira Teira Nach is also relevant here. Eira Teira Nach, which is on page Tofresh Pei Aleph, 681. Actually, 679 and 681. So he says the following. The kivish shekei mavud afal pisha batz musay is barach ein negei klal inin aveda shlatera ma mitzvahs v'loy hapagam, which means atzmus doesn't affect not the positive mitzvahs and not the begam from an aveda, the blemish or the wound that it causes. Makol mokem ma'achash zenegei b'chin shem havaya hameir batzilas hazeh kavyochel kila negei mamish batz musay. Since it's negei to shem havaya that radiates not tzilas, it's also kavyochel negei also not musay. Kiven de kula chad, since they're all one. And this is a point made in a number of places. In here, in Ayin Zayin, Senerena, the Rebbe brings it as well. But then there's a few things that I have to add. In Beletia Mishakela, let's start with the Tzav Ayin Hey. In Tzav Ayin Hey, on the top of page Tov Tov Kuf Chav Beis, which is 922, he adds, I'm sorry, at the bottom of Tov Tov Kuf Chav Gimel, 923 and 924, he adds, both are true, they don't contradict one another. Because there he explains that there's a level of makif ha'chitzenius ha'makif. That's where le'ichbas le. But pnimius ha'makif, of course ichbas le, because in the Savi, that's what he wants. So he says, even though it's there in the Kavon Atzmis, Makom Mokim Eina Nitfus B'zeh Chaz V'Shalom. He's not Nitfus. Nitfus means he's not bound by it. One of the ways you can explain that is because he desires to need. He wants to need, not because he needs. We're Nitfus. When we need something, we need it and we're bound to it. Nitfus means he is still removed from it even though he wants it. So it's the way Atzmos, so to speak, experiences something, if you can call it that. That he's not bound by it, and it's not because he's missing something. And on Loitia Meshakela, Tovshin Yud Beis, the Rebbe adds a Chiddush, he says, Yesh Lemer, that Atzmus wants the Teitzah of Aveda, the result. It's like you do business, the result of the business, but it's not Ichbas, he doesn't care about the details. It's about the result of it. That's what he adds in Tovshin Yud Beis. Anyway, that is essentially, so bottom line as Chassidus goes, the Avedis HaKedesh says it's Atzilus, and higher than Atzilus, Leichbas. The Mareches actually, at Elikurs, lowers it even to a lower level. The Chayet is more like the Avedis HaKedesh. This needs to also be reconciled with the Shita of the Mareches, who hold that the Eris are the Spheres are the energies, not just the containers like the Shita of the Rakanti. But that's for not right now. I'll try to follow up on that matter. And Chassidus goes the other way around. It goes higher and takes the care and the need that God has all the way to Atzmus. But the key thing to remember, this is not a need as we understand need. At best, it's desire for it, and therefore it connects, and therefore it's negeya there, but negeya that's not nitfus, as he says in Ayin Beis, in Hamshach, in Ayin Hey, Tzav Ayin Hey. I hope this helped clarify, and above all, the most important thing, why Ma'af what's the difference about all of this? The difference it ends up being is, what is our relationship with Hashem, with God? Because the whole point of Chassidus is that we're not just a relationship of a servant to a master. The relationship goes all the way to the top. That's why it's negeya. So the Mekubolim Rishonim, the early Kabbalists, their way of best explaining it is that we skip Atzmos out of the picture, so to speak. So our relationship is with levels where the divine manifests himself in the Bechina of Adam Elyon, or other ways where he can be a partner with Ashut of LaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the places that are beyond are beyond. Chassidus, however, insists, and maybe because as it goes the generations later, that the relationship is much deeper than that. That's why this is negeya. So lo yichbas is also important to know, because we need to know there's a dimension of the divine that's beyond us. Don't think you are Chavr Lap, and you're a friend of God's, and you're saying, you know what, I need you and you need me. Yes, there's a Chassidus Shemaisis about that and so on. There's a certain element of awe that we have to remember the divine distance they're completely different from us. But that gufa could also have a relationship once you relate to that distance by realizing that Atzmus is not nitfus in this relationship, even though nisava. So it's in a form of nisava, meaning desire, not a logical type of give and take where we give something, God gives us something. That's on lower levels. On higher levels, ultimately, it's the Eina Rechav Elokus, and B'yachadim Zeh, that's what it is nisava. He wanted that his ultimate Atzmus should have in some way a connection with us, but it's not because he needs it, but it's the desire that's higher than need, and that too is a relationship. So that's why it's important to understand both elements, the closeness and the distance, something like Ava and Yira. Ava creates closeness, Yira creates Kabbalah Sale and the awe that's necessary, and ultimately we need both, as I've discussed other times. Okay, let us go over to the essays, and the time we'll do this quickly. So the 3 essays this week. I want my papers here. First essay is The Game of Hiskafia by Yecheskel Gutfreund, age 60, Draper Laboratory, Brighton, Massachusetts. Very creative essay, and I hope he developed it. He talks about our biggest distraction. So our biggest source of distraction in the contemporary Western culture is computer and internet-based technologies. We learn in the Maimer Basel Legani that we have the power to turn the shtus of klipa, which means the insanity or the shtus, the folly of negative energy, into a force for kedusha, for holiness. Many Eilamisha approach technology as an ill that can only be dealt with by limiting or rejecting technology. We believe we can apply Chassidus to technology to make it a tool for improving one's talents, for dealing with the shtus of the world, the nonsense of the world, rather than something that brings us lower. And he goes into the chapter 8 in Tanya and explains it, and he cites the concept of that there are 3 things. He cites a rabbi that says that in the voice, that there are 3 things that are a sign that something's not coming from Kedusha. If the voice is telling you, I must do it right now. Number 2, if it's something that will lead to more strife and less shalom bias and less trust. And number 3, it's something that will leave you and others with the feeling depressed and drained instead of motivated and enthusiastic. And he suggests taking these issues and turning it into, instead of lectures and essays and formats, and turning it into a game, what he calls the Hiskafia game. And a very interesting way develops a game type of plan, how to play this game, both for adults and children, in a way that can help us all grow in the process. So it's definitely worthwhile reading, and it's something I would definitely follow up with, because this can maybe be developed into something very interesting. So that's essay number 1. It's a very creative application of making a game around this topic that, of course, will create more self-awareness and so on. Essay number 2 is Recognizing the Plan by Sarah Stiefel, age 30, Shlucha, Crown Heights. I woke, and she describes a very personal story, how she awoke one morning, had to go to the embassy, a 7-hour journey from home. She had a 3:30 appointment, and it ended up being an 18-hour ordeal. And how she used Chassidus, which is the Perek Ageres HaKedesh Siman Chaf Hei, to realize that everything is from above, and how it helped assuage, it helped relieve her anxiety from it, and actually turn it into something very positive. Also a very interesting essay, personal, and applying a real Chassidus into a real challenge in life that many of us have, where we have this aggravating day, everything doesn't work out the way we were planned. It's written in detail, you can feel the aggravation in her heart, and then you can feel the relief and the growth that she experienced. And finally, essay number 3, Going Straight to the Source by Mordechai Chemel, age 45, social worker, Ontario, Canada. Many Jews are under the mistaken impression that they must place their Jewish observance on the back burner in order to make a successful living. The following script highlights the Chassidus concept of divine providence, Hashgacha Pratis, and explains how it applies to a person's pursuit of a livelihood. And it's a real-life story in Toronto, Canada, how a person, through Purim, actually transformed their lives to become Shomer Shabbos due to recognizing the need of the understanding the divine providence of their lives. So it's written in a dialogue form between a rabbi and Sam, and you can look this up with the other essays as well, all at meaningfullife.com/essays. And this has been MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 107, every week from 8 to 9 p.m. The essays that are submitted this year are being evaluated, as I mentioned, and continue to tune in. You can pose and present your questions submit questions anonymously at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. And everyone should have a very simchadika week, a simchadika chedesh. And we should all be zeichet to, as I said, mismar geula legula, even before we reach Purim and before Nisan. Thank you very much.